It is such a pleasure to be with you. I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk with you. When I was in college, I majored in German. My mother often asked me why, because in the United States we didn't have a whole lot of opportunity for that. But I was always fascinated with the language and fascinated with the literature and the history of this area of the world. Unfortunately, in the U.S., there aren't terribly many opportunities to speak anything but English. So over the last 30 years, my German has gone away. I can survive with a menu. Mostly I can read a menu. I can read the advertisements on the bus pretty well, big print. They gave me a newspaper outside my hotel room this morning, and it struck me that they had killed a tree for no reason. I used to be able to read German newspapers, no more. But I'm delighted to have a chance to be with you and to know a little bit about the work that you're doing. I want to tell you just a minute or two about where the idea of differentiation came from for me, so that you have some sense of its birth, how it came about. And then I'll talk to you a little bit about our plan for the day. When I was a young person, I made a very solemn vow, and that was that no matter what I did in the world, I would not teach. And the reason I was sure I would not teach was because when I was in 6th grade, which is about 11 years old for us, I was in the school where my mother was a teacher. And I, like many young adolescents, felt very awkward and watched, and really hated that when I went home at night, she would say things about what I had done during the day that she wouldn't have known if a teacher hadn't told her. And so I began to think that teachers were spies, and I just really didn't want any part of that. Somewhere, and I was very serious, somewhere after that I made a second vow, which was foolish given the first one, but the second one was that if I ever did teach, which I was not, I would never teach middle school. And the reason for that was that I was such an unhappy young adolescent. I was no self-confidence, awkward with everything, thought I was just awful in everything. And the idea of living with that misery for the rest of your life, just way too much. So I'll fast forward without the rest of the story and to say that I taught in middle school for 20 years. And my mother was very nice. She never said, "I told you so." I actually began teaching in high school, and then I regressed very nicely and opened a child development center for 3- and 4-year-olds, and then I landed in middle school and stayed there for a long time. And in my first middle school placement, I can remember thinking the week before school began, which was my 4th year of teaching, I think I'm really a teacher now. I think maybe I'm okay. I think maybe I'll be a teacher. And my reason was that the kids had not yet killed me for, misbehavior. And so I drew the foolish conclusion that if they had not killed me yet, they wouldn't in the future. And my second thing was that I thought I was a teacher because in the summer before I started in that school, I was able to work with a group of teachers developing a curriculum guide. And before that, since I had been in a high school and then in a primary setting, I had to start over every time figuring out what to teach. So I'd stay up late enough on Monday to figure out what to do Tuesday, and stay up late enough Tuesday to figure out what to do Wednesday. And by Friday, I was so tired that I often just read to the students, and then I'd start again on the weekend. So I had this big curriculum notebook that told me not just what I should do on Tuesday or Wednesday, but I could see in September what I was supposed to do in May, with all that stuff laid out for me. And the sense that I could handle anything in the classroom, I drew the conclusion that I was going to be fine as a teacher. I guess about 3 weeks into the year, the teachers had to stand in the hallway during class change because I think the principal thought the kids would kill each other if we weren't out there watching. So every time the bell rang, we went in the hall and stood like this and tried to look casual while the kids moved to classes. And about the 3rd week, one day, a little fellow who was about this tall came up to me and he said, I'd never seen him, and I said, "I'm sorry, hon, I couldn't hear what you were saying. Could you say that again?" And he said, And I thought, well, that was helpful. And so I said, wow, you know, it's really noisy out here and I don't hear just real well. Could you try that a little bit louder? I knew what he needed. In our country, kids get lockers that you can put stuff in for the first time in 7th grade, and they're scared to death of them. It's a symbol for growing up. And I don't know, that 2 turns to the left and 1 to the right and 3 to the left, it's just too much. And so they're terrified of not getting their locker open and being late for class and being in trouble. And so we spent almost always the first week or 2 of school running from locker to locker, trying to help kids open them and, you know, put the panic down just a little bit. So I was sure he needed me to open his locker. I just couldn't hear what he was saying with his hand over his mouth. So after he'd done that the 3rd time, I said, I tell you what, this is just not working very well. Let's try it one more time. I'm kind of tall and you're sort of short, and I don't hear real well, and you've got your hand over your mouth. So here's my plan. I'm going to bend down so that I can see your mouth, but you keep your hand down and say what you're saying as loud as you can, and I'll listen as hard as I can, and let's see if we can get it. And he goes, and so I bent down, and his hand started up, and I took it and pulled it down. And what he said to me truly changed my life, and it sent me to Innsbruck this week and then to Salzburg today. He looked at me with big old eyes, and he said, I can't read. His name was Golden. He was 3 weeks late coming to school. He was just getting ready to come into my 7th grade class for the first day. He was 15. The other kids in the class were 12, and he didn't know the whole alphabet. And that moment made me, because it was so big, so different, made me think about things really fast that I had not really thought about in my teaching. I presume that here in the country of ice and snow, some of you have had the experience of sliding on ice in a car. When we do that in the deep south where I come from, it's really panic time. But you know, you think of many things quickly while the car is sliding. And I stood in that hall and I, in just a flash, asked myself questions that I really have never stopped asking myself. First question, of course, is how did this child get into my classroom in such bad shape? How does a child not know how to read by the time he's 15? I pretty quickly decided that was irrelevant. He was mine. And what I realized at that point that I never had before was that I believed that a kid who came to me was my responsibility. It was my job to make the year work for that student, no matter what. Did teachers before him do a poor job? I don't know. His life was very complicated. Maybe they did the best they could. But all of that was irrelevant. He was mine. So quickly, then a lot of other questions came. What materials do I use for him to read? Because everything I have is for 7th graders, and he can't read anything. How do I help him feel like he's a contributing member of a class? When he's 15, they're 12, and he can't do very much. How do I find time to work with him? Because I'm always talking with a class of 35 students. Where is the time to go talk with one student? When I do work with him, do I try to hide that from the other students so they don't know there's a problem? Or do I try to help them understand what's going on? How do I help them integrate with him? How does he feel part of a community? How do they develop respect for a student who can't do the things they accept as basic? One question I thought to myself, and I don't even know why I thought of this in the hall because grading was not that big an issue for me, but I thought, how am I going to give that student a grade? Because no matter what happens, he can't pass 7th grade. No matter how much he grows, he can't pass 7th grade. So should I just say to him now, I just want you to know you can't pass this year, but I sure hope you'll work hard anyhow. That's a big issue. That's a big problem to deal with. And the real last memory I have before I followed him into the classroom was thinking about that big curriculum guide and understanding that that book that I thought was going to save me because it laid out everything so perfectly was actually going to ruin him. Because no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't even get him to the front of that book before the year started, let alone all the way through it. So I spent much of my year trying to answer those questions with Golden. He actually sent me back to school to get a degree in reading. I had no idea how to teach somebody to read. I was a middle school teacher. Nobody had ever, and I had, by the way, never studied teaching. So not only was I not prepared as a teacher, I had no experience with teaching reading. And I did go back to school to get a master's degree in reading, not so much because it would help Golden, because it took too long, but the thought that when other Goldens came along, I could do better. And so for most of that year, Golden and I did this little dance, and when I could, I did stuff designed just for him to try to help him move along. And on days when I just couldn't figure out what to do, he sort of sat and listened. Fortunately, he was a very nice child, and so he was not determined to make my life miserable or to ruin the class. That was helpful. And by the time the year was over, I probably had done some of the best teaching I had ever done. When Golden came in, he was reading at about a kindergarten level. And when he left, he was reading on about a third grade level. It's a lot of growth for a year. And yet, of course, you could look and say he was still a failure because he was several years away from 7th grade. But to this day, one of the things I'm proudest of was that I was able to take him where he was and help him grow as much as he could. And I didn't ever want to feel like a failure because I couldn't do more, and I didn't want him to feel like one either. But Golden taught me lots of things. And one day in the spring, when I thought it was appropriate for Golden to be part of the whole class lesson, which I tried to do as often as it made sense, we were doing a lesson on symbolism in literature. And so I said to the class, guys, we've talked a lot about different elements of literature. We've talked about plots and settings and characters and themes and metaphors and similes and hyperboles and all of these things. But there's one more tool that authors use that I want to try you with today. I kind of think you're old enough now for this to make sense to you. So I want to teach you one more thing about literature before you go, near the end of the year. And I want to ask you a question. We can do this lesson in one of two ways. I can either tell you the name of the thing that I want you to think about and show you some examples, and then you can try to find some. Or we can do it like a detective game, and I'll show you clues, and you can try to figure out what the thing is. Which would you prefer? Well, they were 12 years old, so what do you suppose the vote was? They voted for the detective game, which is really good because otherwise it would have been a very short lesson. I was counting on them to vote for the detective game. So what I actually did, though I'm sure I didn't know the name of it at the time, was what in the US we call a concept attainment lesson. And there's a set of strategy steps that you follow in a concept attainment lesson to help students understand kind of that big idea that is an underpinning of the content area. So I put some things on the desktop, and I held up a poster, and I said to the kids, what is this? Every hand's up. It's a peace sign. And I said, what do you mean it's a peace sign? And the kids said, oh, it stands for peace. If somebody has it on their shirt, or if it's on a poster, it means you want peace instead of war. And I said, really? That's amazing. All it is a circle with some sticks in it. How can all that stand for peace? Well, it does. Everybody knows that when they see it. It stands for peace. And I said, wow, that's amazing, isn't it? You knew all that just by looking at this thing. Hold up the second object. What's this? It's a red cross. And I said, well, I can see that. It's red and it's in the shape of a cross. Is that all? No, it's where you go if you need help. And I said, so if I'm going home this afternoon and I run out of gas, I should go to the Red Cross? No, not that kind of help. And they could all tell me, this is the kind of help you get at the Red Cross, not this kind. And I said, wow, that's amazing, isn't it? You know all that just from looking at this thing. So I kept holding up actual objects. And then I did what the developer of concept attainment said, you move from the really concrete things to pictures of stuff, which is a little more abstract. So I held up pictures, and every time I held up one, practically every hand's up. Everybody wants to tell me what the thing is. I'm so impressed with myself, I can hardly stand it. Finally, though, it's occurring to me that everybody already knows everything. Now, I don't know about you all, I had never been taught what a pre-assessment was. I had never even heard of a pre-assessment, so it never occurred to me to check kids before a unit started to see if they knew something. But all of a sudden, I've got this idea, I wonder if somebody taught them this last year, because everybody seems to know. So finally, I said to the kids, you know what, I think you all might be pretty good with this stuff already. I think you understand this, so I think pretty soon you'll be ready to name these things we've been looking at. But I tell you what, if any of you all can think of some of these that you'd like to come up and draw on the board, you can do that, and you can see if your friends can figure out what they are. Well, they were 12, so a bunch of them wanted to come. And they would come up and draw something on the board, and the kids would raise their hands, and they'd say, what is this? And the kids would say, it's a so-and-so, it's a whatever. And the student would say, tell me more about that. And the kids would say whatever more information was. And inevitably, the student would say, that's amazing, isn't it? You know all that just from looking at this thing. And I'm thinking, golly, I'm wonderful. Not only do they know what this stuff is, but they know just how to teach it. Everything's terrific here. So finally, I said to the kids, okay, I don't think we need to worry with this anymore. I think you've got it. So now what I want you to do is give me a name for all these things. The ones I showed you, the ones you drew. If we had to put something on the table, a little sign that said what this is, what would you call them? Well, a strange thing happened all of a sudden. Now, instead of everybody sitting forward and all the hands are up, they've sat back in their seats. And most of them are looking at the floor because there's a right answer now. And they might not know the right answer, and so they don't want to make eye contact with me. And so, very quiet, and finally, about 3 hands went up, and I thought, thank goodness. So I called on a kid, and he said, they're signs. And I thought, oh, phooey. But being a good teacher, I said, you know what, you could call those things signs. That's a good word for it. Let's look for some synonyms. What else could you call them besides signs? Nobody's hands up now because all 3 of the kids thought they were signs. So it's very quiet. And finally a little kid raised his hand and he said, maybe you'd call them trademarks? And what you all would call that in German, what's the word? Trademark. And I said, that's another good term, wrote that on the board under sign. That's another great term for it. You could call some of these things trademarks. Let's keep going. What other synonyms can you find? And finally, one little kid in the back of the room raised her hand, and she said really quietly, my dad is a printer, and I think he might call them logos. And I thought, oh, shoot, it's getting worse by the minute. We've gone from sign to trademark to logo. And I said, that's another good synonym for it, and I put that on the board. And then I said, okay, guys, keep going. Let's give me some more synonyms. What else can you think of? Now it is like a grave in that room. Nobody is moving. Nobody's looking at me. There's no life anywhere. And an interesting thing happened that I had never noticed. I've seen it many times since then, but I'd never noticed it before. There were about 6 or 7 kids in the classroom who lifted their head from the floor. They very carefully bypassed me with their eyes, so I didn't make eye contact with them, but they looked over at the table in the corner, the round table where Golden was sitting. They weren't looking at Golden, though. They were looking at Jonathan, who was at the table with Golden. And Jonathan knew what it meant. Again, I hadn't understood it yet. But when Jonathan saw that happen, he went, and I said, okay, Jonathan, what do you think these things are? And he says, they're symbols. And I'm thinking to myself, thank you, God. But trying to be a good teacher, I said, that's another great synonym for it. And I put that on the board, trying really hard not to show any favoritism at all in there. And I said, okay, let's keep going. We've got sign and trademark and logo and symbol. What else can you think of? Now, a really strange thing happened. Every kid's looking at me again. Nobody's uncomfortable anymore. And I thought, what they understood that I didn't know was once Jonathan has spoken, the right answer is out there. So they didn't have to worry anymore because they knew Jonathan had already provided the correct answer and it was all we needed. So I fell right into their trap. And I said, well, as it happens, guys, you do call these things symbols in literature. Other places you might call them signs or trademarks or logos, but in literature you call them symbols. And they're looking at me like, what'd you expect, lady? That's what Jonathan said. So I go to the next step and I said, okay, now that we know what they're called, let's come up with a definition. Give me a definition of a symbol. I didn't know about having kids work in think, pair, share groups or, heads together. I didn't know about taking notes in journals to get your ideas going. So I'm just expecting them to pop out with a definition, and they're not going to do that. So now all the eyes are back on the floor again, and this time I don't even have one hand up, not even one. So half a dozen kids or so, heads pop up from the floor, bypass me again, look at Jonathan, and the second time I'm about to figure this out, Jonathan looks around and he sees it and he goes, And what I came to understand was Jonathan was not trying to be impolite. He was just bored out of his mind. And that big drawing in of breath was to try to get his body going again so he could wake from sleep and join us in there, So Jonathan goes, And I said, okay, Jonathan, what do you think a symbol is? That I had not assigned them this for homework. It was not on any syllabus they had or anything. They had no idea what we were going to do in class. Jonathan says, a symbol is a concrete representation of an abstract entity. Oh my God. And I thought, shoot, man, I think it is. Wow. That's the best definition of a symbol I've ever heard. Never needed a different one, have remembered it for 30 years. And what I understood in that minute was that whereas my curriculum was dreadful for Golden, because he couldn't even make it to the front of it before the year ended, Jonathan already knew everything that was in it and had been sitting there from September to April waiting for something new to happen. And I just thought he was a good student. I was happy that he made A's. I was happy that he laughed at my jokes, and he hadn't learned a thing. And so what I learned in that year, and it has truly never been any different even at the university, I can look at a class as though all the people in it are the same, and I'll be fooling myself. At the University of Virginia, where our standards are very high to get in, I have students who don't speak the language I speak, and it's very hard for them to learn if I don't make some adaptations. I have students who have learning disabilities. I have students with very bad family problems. I always have students who are marvelous teachers and terrible writers, and people who are amazing writers and awful in the classroom. And if I don't see some of those differences and do something about it, our time is not as well spent. So those questions that came from Jonathan and Golden, I really spent the next 19 years in the classroom trying to answer. How do I find materials? How do I keep us together as a class and do those things that we have to do in our content areas, and yet make it work for all those kids that are in there? What can I do if somebody finishes too soon or already knows something? What do I do if somebody needs more time for things? When is it good to work with smaller groups who need particular things that everybody else doesn't need? And when should we be together working as a class? And how do I help all those kids understand and respect one another's learning needs so that we work together as a team, not as a bunch of individuals in the class? So for me, differentiation is not something that sprouted out of the university. It sprouted from Jonathan and Golden, who now would be in their 40s, 45 or so, 50, 45, 40. And every time I come someplace like this, Jonathan and Golden come with me because those questions are still the ones that I'm trying to answer. And so for me, the work that I do is not about any set of strategies you have to use. It's not about any set of rules you have to follow. It really is just asking that question, what do you do with the Jonathan and Golden problem? My guess would be, because the world is very much the same everywhere, that in every class you teach, you have some students who are way ahead and some students who are lagging behind. Some students who have identifiable learning problems and some kids who just have problems. And sometimes the kids with problems are very smart, and sometimes they're kids who struggle to learn as well. So for me, the differentiation question is, what do I do about Jonathan and Golden? That's what it really is. And what I'm going to try to do today, and I will tell you before we start, I'm probably not going to make it all the way through because of time, but I want to share with you what I would consider to be the 4 most important ideas about differentiation. And my hope is that you can look at them and say, I see what she's saying. I don't agree with this part. I get the idea, but I would have a problem here in my class. This would work with the system I'm in. This would present challenges. It's a way just to continue a conversation that you all have been having about this topic, and I hope we'll continue to have a long time, because to the best of my capacity to figure it out, Jonathan and Golden aren't going anywhere. They're going to be back next year, and 5 years from now, and 15 years from now. And in much of the world, the Jonathan-Golden problem is getting more intense, not less so, because the world is moving and we're all in each other's living rooms, and we have gaps between poverty and affluence which create big issues in schools. And so the question of what we do with Jonathan and Golden is sort of permanent, I think. Does that make sense? You laughed in the right places, so that's good. I was telling Joanna yesterday, I did a presentation in Mexico with a translator, and I said something that I thought might have some humor in it, and nobody made a sound. And I thought, ooh, that just doesn't translate very well. So I kept on going, and about 3 minutes later, when I was being really serious, the audience just all broke out in laughter all at once. And the translation took about 3 minutes every time. Very strange day. So I was pretty pleased with you all. That worked out much better here. I think we have some hope. So what I want to ask you to do, because you have come from different places today with other things on your mind, what's your current understanding of differentiation? The chances are pretty good that if there are 50 or so of you in here, there are 50 slightly different understandings. And what I'd like to ask you to do is to choose one of 3 ways that I'm going to show you to kind of sketch out for a minute what your current thinking about differentiation is. What does it mean to you? What do you think its parts are? How do you think it looks or functions in a classroom? And what I'm going to ask you to do is first to choose one of the 3 ways to think. Second, take a couple of minutes just to write, make a note or two, just jot down an idea or two so you have something to hang on to. And then I'm going to ask you in a particular way to share what you're thinking with a couple of other people. So here are the 3 possibilities for you. One of the things that we find all around the world when we're working with differentiation is that a lot of teachers are pretty sure they already do it. And yet when we go into classrooms to observe, sometimes we can't find it. And one of the things that I've found is that a lot of us spend a lot of time talking about the need to do a thing called differentiation, but we never define it. We never say, here's the definition, here's what it means. And so we're thinking in different ways, and we're not communicating very well because the thing that we have in our mind doesn't match the thing that's in the head of the other person. So a real good possibility would be just write out your definition of differentiation. Doesn't have to be perfect for the dictionary, but if you had to define it for people that you work with, wherever that is, what would your definition be? Good start, because we need that commonality. On the other hand, some of you might prefer this as a possibility. Let's assume that next year you encounter a new teacher, perhaps teaching next door to you, perhaps a teacher that you work with from the university, but somebody who's new to your school or new to teaching. And that person said, I hear people talk about this thing called differentiation. I don't have any idea what that is. Help me see what it would be like in my classroom. Don't need a definition. I want to see it. I want to know what it would look like. So a good way to do that would be to do a chart kind of with 2 columns. In a classroom that's not differentiated, you might see this. Whereas in a class that is differentiated, it might look this way. So for example, in the classes that I taught before Golden and Jonathan, the non-differentiated ones, everybody would have read from the same material all the time. But I learned with Jonathan and Golden, I can find material on the same topic at very different levels of reading. And so more typically after that, I might have 2 or 3 websites that students could go to, or 2 different books, or 3 different articles to read on the same topic, but just trying to give them something that they could really stretch from. So that's an example. In a non-differentiated classroom, all read the same stuff. In a differentiated classroom, might have more than one thing to read sometimes. Third possibility is kind of to go back to Jonathan and Golden. Can you think of a metaphor or an analogy for differentiation? A metaphor that I think of sometimes is an orchestra conductor. The orchestra conductor has to know that piece of music really well. And then their job is to get all those people in the orchestra to play the same piece of music. But some instruments come in at one time and go out, and then another set comes in and goes out, and sometimes this student plays only a few notes, whereas a soloist might play a whole page. And the orchestra conductor is telling some people, slow down, others speed up, quieter, more life in what you're doing. And that person is trying to make one piece of music happen with many different instruments and instrumentalists. That's one way to think about differentiation. That's one analogy or metaphor or comparison for it. What's one that you might think of? Or perhaps you might like to draw a trademark or a logo or a symbol for differentiation visually. How would you capture that in a small piece? So what I'm going to ask you to do again is pick one of these 3 things and take just a minute or 2 without any conversation to make a few notes. Or if you don't have paper, to think in your head. And then in just a minute, I'll ask you to share with somebody, but I'm going to ask you to do that in a particular way. So take just a minute and think for a bit, or write for a bit. Okay, let me ask you a question and ask each of you, if you will, to respond to this. And I'd like you to look at each other for a minute and see what folks are doing, because sometimes it's kind of interesting. If you did the first column, raise your hand, the definition. Okay, look around and see how many folks did that. Okay, how many of you did the second column, show me in a classroom? Okay, look around and see the contrast there. How many of you did the third column? Okay, so we had fewest people do the first column, the most do the second column, and the middle number did the third column. Which of those columns is school? The first column is school. That's the first column. You guys are teachers and you didn't even all choose number 1, for heaven's sakes. Neither would your students. And yet you're all doing the same thing. Share your understanding of differentiation, or of a formula, or of maps, or of a black hole in space. Whatever it is, you can have all the students looking at whatever the idea is you want them to do, and yet give them different ways to do it. Often works better. I'm going to tell you more about that in a minute, but here's what I want to ask you to do. This is a little tricky with your seating, but I think we are able to pull this off. I'm going to ask you to try to form a group of about 3 or 4 where hopefully everybody in the group did something different. In other words, if you have a group of 4, at least all 3 different things would be represented. If you can only get 2, then that's fine, but don't settle for less than 2 and try to get 3. To help you know who to look for so you can find the other people that didn't do what you did, I'm going to ask you to just hold up a finger that marks the column that you did. So column number 1, column number 2, or column number 3, and then just move around for a minute and make a group of 3 or 4 and share with each other quickly what you wrote. 1, 2, or 3, find some folks, move around, find some buddies. You can get up and walk, it's okay. You're gonna have to get up and walk, guys. You can get up and move around, it'll work. What I did with you was use one of a million strategies you can use in the classroom to open it up a little bit more, to make more room for learning to make better sense to more kids. What I did here was based on a strategy from Robert Sternberg. I don't know how many of you know him. He was a professor at Yale. Somebody does in the back. That's great. I hope some of you have read his work because he's very interesting. You probably do know the work of Howard Gardner at Harvard with multiple intelligences. Sternberg is a contemporary of his, same age, same psychology, neuroscience background. And his work is similar to Gardner's in that what he has found is that people prefer learning things in different ways. We seem to be wired to do things in certain ways. And so Sternberg's research suggests that some of us may sometimes prefer to learn in analytical ways, and I'll come back and talk about these in a minute. Some of us sometimes do better to learn in practical ways, and some of us sometimes do better to learn in creative ways. Sternberg calls that a triarchic theory of intelligence, which is a bunch of big words, so my colleagues have started calling this tri-mind, a three-parted mind, tri-mind. And here's what Sternberg says. All of us can do all these things. You would not be successful in your career if you could not do analytical, practical, and creative things. So it's not that we're only one kind of person, but at least some of the time, one of these things just makes better sense to us. It's just more interesting than another. And so I want to show you what I did here. The first type of intelligence that Sternberg talks about is analytical intelligence, and he calls that schoolhouse intelligence. In other words, classroom intelligence, the kind of stuff we do at school all the time. So when I said to you, which column is school, almost immediately you knew. Column number 1 is what we do in school. We do formal definitions of things more than anything else. So that's what this is. Analytical learning is looking at the parts of things and seeing how they come together to make a whole. It's breaking down how things work so we see the relationships between them. So if you say to a student, write a paper and use this format, that's analytical. Compare and contrast these two time periods in history, that's analytical. Show me how the parts of a cell work together as a whole, that's typically analytical stuff. The second option that he has is practical intelligence. And whereas he calls this schoolhouse intelligence, he calls this street smarts. Being street smart means you are real good out in the real world. You're a problem solver. You can get things done. You may or may not know all the information that the analytical guy does, but you can get the job done. You can figure out the steps to go through, or you can fix the thing that needs to be fixed, or you can make a plan and follow through. You're the person I want if something has to get done in the real world. Yeah. That's this one. Don't bother me with the definition. Show me what it's going to look like in my classroom, for heaven's sakes. Give me something I can learn from. You know, I can really see it and get involved with it. The third kind of intelligence, creative intelligence, he calls it imaginative problem solving. Imaginative problem solving. I hope that all of you have taught a kid like Sean. Sean was one of many I taught who had some real strengths here. Sometimes we really like those kids. Sometimes we'd like to send them to summer camp for about 11 months. Sean was a kid who woke up every morning, I'm convinced, saying, how can I improve her lesson plan today? And he frequently felt free to make the suggestions to me. So one day I was explaining a project to the kids, and it was a brilliant project, and I know that because I created it. And I was being very careful in going through to explain to the kids what to do. And right in the middle of it, of course, Sean goes, so I called on him, and he said with some real disdain, Miss T, are you ever going to assign us a project that doesn't presuppose a three-dimensional universe? I was his English teacher. And so I looked at him and I said, you know, Sean, I don't think I ever am going to assign you a project that doesn't presuppose a three-dimensional universe, because I don't know how to create one. But I had learned an important sentence to add to the end of that by that point in my career, and that was, If you can design a project that doesn't presuppose a three-dimensional universe, and you can accomplish the same goals that this brilliant project I'm explaining accomplishes, that might be really neat, and you might really learn something, and we might really learn something. And he did, and we did. He really rewrote the entire project so that it was looking at something completely different that wasn't bound by a three-dimensional universe, and it was fascinating. And this kid who would have done what he had to do to get my project in lived and ate and breathed his version of it and cared deeply about it. And the rest of us learned to care deeply about it because he wanted to share just really often. He's a kid who is very imaginative and keeps saying, why can't we do it this way? What if we did this? Don't you see this connection? And most of the time we're going, no, we don't really see that connection, but he does see it. So what Sternberg's research has found, and it's been done with students from the primary grades through the university, is that one of two things can be really important. One is if you do what I did today and let you learn something in a way that makes better sense for you, you learn it better. And what that means is that all of us better be working on the same thing, which is what is your conception of differentiation, or what is the interrelationship of elements in a cell. We have to all be working on the same goal. But if we do that and kids can work on it in their preferred way, their achievement goes up. They do better and they're more engaged in school. They like it better. They want to learn more. The second thing he's found, which is also kind of interesting, is that if you and I teach so that in every unit we do all three of these things. Kids have some analytical tasks and some practical tasks and some creative tasks. They all get a chance to fly in the area where they're happiest, but they also learn to extend their strengths in the other two areas. So this is just one of many ways that you can make more room in a classroom for different kinds of kids. Most of you all have studied differentiation, some with Tanya or other folks that are here. This is what we would call a learning profile differentiation. How do you like to learn best? And let me just give you some choices and you pick the one that kind of works for you. Let me ask you a question. Did anybody find it confusing to have more than one approach in your group? Don't usually. Did anybody find it interesting to see what somebody else did that was different from them? Yeah, I heard Tanya's sitting right under my ear, so I heard her say, why did I think of that? And you know, sometimes when you do hear something that's just somebody draws the logo. Somebody draws a logo and you think, man, I can see that, but I would never have thought to do that. It really kind of extends your thinking. One young man who was a biology teacher I was with when he tried this the first time, and he gave the students the three options on a lesson on the structure and function of the cell in biology, and was so excited to tell me what the students had done. But he said this one thing I will never forget. The choice that he gave kids for the creative one was use materials that are in the classroom to create a cell. But when you choose the materials, choose them carefully. So if you use a rubber band, why did something elastic seem important in that point? If you use something that's hard, why did you use a hard object or bigger or smaller? So that you not only make the cell, but you have to explain the reason for the craftsmanship that you had. And he said he thought the students would use sandwich bags or potato chips or, rubber bands or paper clips. And he said some of them did use small things, pencils. But he was surprised that some kids used globes and screens and chairs and great big things. And it changed his whole conception to see the big ones versus the little ones. But the thing that just really astonished him was in every class, somebody built the cell out of the people. And they could say, these people are the cell wall, and I think they're the cell wall because they function this way among their peers. These kids would make a good nucleus, and my reason for thinking they would be a nucleus was, and he said you could see the kids going, yeah, wow, yeah, wow. And what was amazing, of course, again, is the kids who did that, just were so much more into learning than if everybody had just had to write the definition or the explanation. But they benefited from hearing this, and these kids benefited from hearing this. And you can do it pretty quickly without too much fuss and just make a little more room. Thoughts or questions there? Make sense to you?
Yeah.
By the way, I taught 12-year-olds for a long time. You cannot offend me. And it's okay if you ask questions that might seem impolite. It's okay to say, yes, but that can't work here. I think they've taken care of me and you can't bother me very much. So feel free anytime. Okay, I want to share with you now my conception of differentiation. And I would have to tell you that if you had heard me say this 10 years ago, you would have heard me say some slightly different things than now. And I hope that if I have the chance to be doing this 10 years from now, you will still be hearing some slightly different things. And that is because anything worth knowing that has any richness ought to grow up with us. And every time I do anything new, I have a new epiphany. And I think I haven't emphasized this enough, or this is confusing people, or wow, what I just saw that teacher do teaches me a whole new thought about this thing that I'm doing. But I want to use this one because it's reasonably quick and makes good sense to me. One of the classes that I teach at the university in the spring is a differentiation class. And I love it because it's a big class, has about 40 or 50 students in it most of the time. And almost all of them, I have a few master's students and a few doctoral students. The majority of them are undergraduates who have just finished their student teaching. And they are suddenly very humble. They know what they don't know. And now, more than ever during their time at the university, they want to learn how to teach. That one semester, they are so hungry. They just want to know everything because they've tried that student teaching. And before that, they were sure they could walk on water. And now they're pretty sure they're going to sink next year. So they want to know stuff. So Adam came up to me after about 4 or 5 weeks in the class. And he said, Carol, I think maybe I just don't understand differentiation. And I said, well, Adam, I don't think that would be a big surprise. You've only been in here a little while. We've still got 2/3 of the class left. I wouldn't expect that you would understand everything. And he said, oh, no, I understand. I'm reading the books and they all make sense. And when we do blogs on the internet, I communicate with the other people and I understand what you're saying in class. I just know something's missing from my understanding. And I said, well, I tell you what, why don't you go home and for next week, just really quickly, don't spend a lot of time on it, but just really quickly write out your understanding of differentiation. Bring it back and show it to me, and we'll look and see if it looks like anything big is missing, if you misunderstand something. So of course, because he's really eager, he goes home and does an entire essay on differentiation, but he came back and he handed it to me the next week. And here's what the first line said. Differentiation is a sequence of common sense decisions made by teachers with a student-first orientation. And I said, wow, Adam, I think you got it. And he said, no, that can't be it. And I said, no, I don't mean to say you know everything, but I don't know that I've ever heard anybody explain it better than that. I'll show you what else he said in a minute. This is profoundly powerful to me, and if we only got this far today and you took this away and chewed on it, it'd be worth some time. It's a sequence of decisions. If this, then this. If this, then this. If this, then this. And they are common sense decisions. They're not academic, out of a textbook, in the sky decisions. They're a series of common sense decisions made by teachers with a student-first orientation. And here's what he meant by that. He didn't mean huggy, kissy, feely things. He meant by teachers who really care if every kid learns. They take the learning of every kid seriously. And so any teacher who says it's not about me and the material I cover, it's about them and what they learn, could make these decisions. And so then he went on to tell me his sequence of common sense decisions. And this is what it is. And this is where I am with differentiation now. The first one is, I had better know with real precision where I'm headed in this unit and in this lesson. In other words, not what am I going to cover today, not what activities will we do today, not what am I going to tell the kids today, but when we finish, what must they know, what must they understand, and what must they be able to do. So I better know my target. It's a very different thing to know what I'm going to cover than to know where the kids should come out. What should they know? What should they understand? What should they be able to do? And then he said the second thing is, if I'm real clear with those goals, I better be worrying all the time about where the kids are in relation to those goals. When I taught, I used to travel with my students a lot, and I took my 8th graders to New York City every spring on the weekend. Now, I don't know how many of you have traveled to New York City, but I taught in a fairly rural area with kids who haven't traveled much. And if you have been to Manhattan at 5 o'clock on a Friday night with about 20 million people in the street, and the bus stops and lets those little country kids off right there, it's the most exhilarating and most terrifying moment of your life. And perennially in my head, I saw those millions of people as a large dragon that wanted to swallow up my students so that I would never see them again. And so I became a maniac with counting. We'd walk a block and I'd stop and count the kids. We'd cross the street and I'd stop and count the kids. We'd go into a restaurant and I'd stop and count them. We'd come out of the restaurant and I'd stop and count them. And they were always saying, Ms. Tomlinson, if you need to know how to count higher than 31, we can show you. And despite all of that, every once in a while, I still lost one. Now, let me just tell you, this feeling in your stomach when you're standing there thinking, I'm going to have to call and tell this child's parents that I have lost him in New York City, is cause for sweat and some serious ulceration. I mean, it is bad for the digestion. Here's what Adam's saying. It's your job to get those kids home safely. It's your job to get them to where they need, what they need to know, understand, and be able to do. And you had better be counting to see who's with you and who walked across the street the wrong way and who got so far in front of you that you lost them and who got stopped for a minute to look in a store window and you have no idea they got delayed somewhere. It ought to be that important. What's your destination? Where are the kids in regard to it all the way? Third common sense decision, animation is not liking Austria too much. Once you know where the kids are in relation to the goals, in other words, you're going to always find some kids know more than you thought they did, and some kids don't understand what you did yesterday or last week or even 2 years ago. So once you see they're all over the place, what are you going to do about that? What are you going to do about the kids that don't yet read as well as they should? What are you going to do about Jonathan, who knows as much as you do about the subject? What are you going to do about the kid who can learn with his hands but doesn't learn quite as well with writing? What are you going to do about the kid who learns much better when he can talk to somebody than when he just sits and listens? And then finally, all of this needs to happen in an environment that says to kids, you're safe here, you're supported here, you're respected here, and big things are expected of you in here. So that environment needs to be a place that really supports the hard work of learning and in a lot of ways demands the hard work of learning but has a support system to go with the demand. Those are Adam's 4 ideas about differentiation. Mm-hmm. And when I read those, I said, Adam, you're fine, hon. I know that you haven't taught much and you have many things to learn, but in terms of differentiation, this is it. It is a series of common sense decisions made by teachers who really care to make every kid successful and who believe that they can. And these are the basic decisions. The thing that's cool about this to me is you can use Sternberg's work to help you with this or not. You can use concept attainment to help you with this or not. You can use tiered lessons to help you with this or not. Learning contracts, 1,000 things, doesn't matter. This is what you're trying to do. And you can make it happen in a way that works for your grade, your subject, your style, your kids. It's just this that we're trying to accomplish. So what do you think? Mm-hmm. Sensible? Mm-hmm. Or doesn't ring? What do you think? Show me something. Sensible? I don't care. It's your thinking. It's wherever your head is. There's not a right answer. I want to show you Adam's next comment. I thought it was one of those ooh moments for a teacher. When I said to him that he had it, he said to me, okay, well, if that's all differentiation is, why doesn't everybody do it? What he's already realized is I'm reading this stuff in a book that makes sense, but I was in a school last year where I watched teachers and I didn't see too much of this happening. And if you're telling me this is right and it makes sense, how come everybody doesn't do it? And I thought that was a pretty powerful question, really, because for me, this does make really good sense. It's what teaching came to mean to me. So I'm on his page. I'm okay with him. And when he said that, I paused for a minute thinking, wow, that's a tough question to answer. And in my moment of pause, he assumed that that meant I didn't understand his question. So he repeated it for me in a different way. And he said, I guess what I'm asking you is this. Which of these four things would teachers think are not important? Which of these four things would teachers not think is important?
The last one?
The last one, and I think you could, if you looked at our practice, including my practice on a lot of days, you could conclude that a clear learning destination must be unimportant to me because the kids have no idea where we're going and I may not have any idea either. You know, if you watch me on certain days, that could be a conclusion for you. If you watched me on other days, you'd think, for heaven's sake, she's got two kids in the back of the room with their heads down practically asleep, and a couple of other kids playing with pencils on the desktop, and about two kids are really with her, and that seems to make her happy. Doesn't she understand what's going on in the lives of these kids? And your conclusion would be, number two doesn't matter very much. And on some other days, all you'd ever see would be me standing in the front of the class doing the same thing with everybody all day long. And you'd think, well, she must not feel like it's important to do something for the kids that can't read or that already know this or that have different life experiences. You know, honestly, this is a personal thing. This isn't a right answer. I'd be more offended in my classroom if you ever saw a day where this wasn't the case than with those others. To me, this is my humanity as a teacher. And if I've lost this, the rest of it is way short anyhow. However, I have worked with a lot of teachers where they pretty much say to me, you know, life's tough. Kids have to learn to be in the real world. It's tough out there. They either get it or they don't get it. And I have to prepare them for the real world, and I don't want to mollycoddle them. And I've taught with teachers who'd say that to you. And in those cases, you'd certainly have to assume that number four is not important. It flies in the face for me, again, this is personal, not, you know, the gospel truth. But it flies in the face for me of everything that I know about human beings. I believe kids come to school not so much saying, oh my goodness, lady, if you'll just show me some more poetry, I'll be so happy. I think they come in every year saying, am I going to be okay in here? Is it going to be all right for me in here? Are you going to like me, grubby little creature that I am? Are you going to really kind of think I'm cool? And I think that's where we all start as learners, especially when we're young. But I don't mean to digress too much, but I'm bad with that. I want to tell you a great story from the university. I was teaching a doctoral class, and I want you to get an image of PhD students, adults, life experience. I go into the class on the first day early to get stuff set up, and there's one man in there. And so we started talking, and I asked him a little bit about himself, and we just kind of chatted. And I looked down, and I said, man, those are cool tennis shoes. Where did you get those? I've never seen any like that. I had never seen any, and I did think they were cool. So we talked about that, and we did a few more things. Like 3 or 4 weeks later, he emailed me about something. And he said, by the way, I want to tell you that when I went home from class the first day, I told my wife, this is going to be a really good class because she told me I had on cool tennis shoes. PhD people aren't any different than 12-year-olds. It mattered to him just in the same way. It wasn't the tennis shoes, it was that I saw something. And I saw something that was unique to him. And I saw something he was proud of, and I thought it was cool. And that was a proxy for everything else. And the stupid tennis shoe comment opened him up to my class. Not my erudition, but my tennis shoe comment. So, yeah, I think, I'll tell you what my students said about this because I posed the question to them. You can decide. They said, I don't think it's that teachers think those things are unimportant, any of them. It's just very hard to do. And we get into ruts and habits. And we do what we do and we don't think about them. But if we had to defend, this one makes no difference in terms of learning, the chances are pretty good we wouldn't defend that. Talk with each other about that for just a second. What do you think about that? It's not a right or a wrong answer. Can you buy Adam's conception here? Can you buy this and his 4 things? Or is there one where you think, you know, truly with my 5, 10, 15, 20 years of experience, whatever it is, I just don't think that matters very much. Talk about that for just a second. I'm going to give you just a minute or two with some chance to ask some questions, so I'm going to ask Tanya to sort of guide this part of the discussion for us. But one of your colleagues was asking, you know, I guess the question that's the big question in the room. I first thought she was asking me, how do you do all this, which is a pretty big question, and that's what Tanya and company are wanting to work with you on. And by the way, there's not just one right way to do it. There are many ways to do it. I've seen teachers around the world work in different ways. But what she actually was asking me was number 2, how do you persistently know where kids are all the way down the line? And there are a lot of strategies for that. I'm going to show you just a very few of them after we take a break. There's some strategies for doing number 3. Number 1 may be the hardest. All of us know what we're going to say tomorrow. All of us know what we're going to cover. It's very hard to say what kids should know, understand, and be able to do. Even for me in my classes at the university now that I've taught for years and years, I'm still sharpening those things, and I'm still trying to figure out the best way to say them. It's a revision process. Number 4 is a way of life. My claim to you is not, oh, sure, this is easy, go back and do it tomorrow, you've got it made, no problem. What I know is that after years and years of looking, when I see teachers who aspire to these things, keep chasing them even though they're hard, the teachers get better and better and the kids get better and better. Mm-hmm. And that's what it's really like. Tanya and I were exchanging stories yesterday, and she was telling me one, and I was telling her about a man that was, looked to me to be in his 70s maybe, and he was in a workshop that I was doing in the spring one year about this time. And he asked 4 or 5 really good questions, thought-provoking questions in the morning. And then on the way to lunch, he came up and latched on to me and was asking some more stuff. And it was all really provocative stuff. And so I said to him, why are you so into a workshop this close to the end of the year? And he said, oh, I retire in 11 days, whatever it was. And I have promised myself that I will keep learning as much as I can about my craft until the day I close that door behind me for the last time. I'd want my kid in that man's class, you know. He didn't think he started teaching and finished after the first year. He figures if he's there for 40 years, and I bet he was, that the last day of the 40 years, he should still be trying to figure it out better. This isn't any of it something you go do tomorrow and you've got it all. You find a first step and you think about it, and then you say, so how do I make that better? And then you add a second step and you polish that for a while and you keep going. Adam's common sense is not, well, if we had 2 brain cells, we could do this. It's how many of us really keep at it? How many of us really dedicate ourselves to it, I think. And I'm going to show you some examples of all those things when we come back. So give this to Tanya for a minute to see questions, thoughts, misgivings.
Yeah. Basically, because wir können das auch auf Deutsch machen, wenn das einfach fließender ist für alle hier. Das heißt, ich kann auch übersetzen. Momentan, also es geht hier um Anmerkungen, Resonanzen, Irritationen, beziehungsweise auch Fragen zu diesen Dingen am Anfang. Also die erste Hälfte ist um Mindset und was ist Differenzierung in Carol's Sinne, und dann in der zweiten Hälfte geht es eher ein bisschen in Konkretheit auch. Ich weiß, das brennt immer unter den Nägeln. Aber zu diesem Zeitpunkt gibt es was, either English or German? Jawohl. Wir brauchen das Mikro bei euch.
I don't know if this is really a question or kind of a comment, but we had a good discussion talking about these points. And from looking at them, it kind of seems that without the first one, the other 2 don't really exist. You have to have a destination in order to kind of see where the kids are at. And we sort of discussed also the difficulty of coming up with the destination. In the States, we have standards. I think that's kind of becoming something big here. But a lot of teachers that I've seen basically just look at the standard and don't really think about the deep understanding that they want their students to be at. And within that destination, it might be, you know, a large concept, but within that, you have to really make small destinations. So my question is basically, do you find that it's kind of human nature not to really think backwards as far as what the destination is, and then how you're going to present it, and then how you're going to make it interesting? And I don't know, like backward design, that approach, do you feel that that's something very helpful or to learn?
Your insight is a big one, and I want to even blow it up a little bit bigger. He said without number one, number two and number three don't even exist. Differentiation is this. That's where differentiation actually is. But what I have learned over the years is without these two, this one doesn't exist. And if I don't have these things in tow, this can't really exist. In other words, they're interdependent with each other. And so for me, it would be much easier to come here and say, let me just show you a half a dozen strategies you can use in your classroom in case you want to, you know, do a few different things here and there. But without all those pieces, the system falls down. This one is very difficult to do. I think it may depend on our personalities. For some people, number four is impossible to do. It's just not something they believe in or care to do. But I find that number one is particularly hard, and it's hard for a couple of reasons. Most of us have gone to school where we were graded on how much information we could give back. In other words, facts and skills that we can do. And most of us haven't been taught to understand the subjects. I don't know how you are, but if somebody said to me today, I'm going to put you in your high school cafeteria, and I'm going to give you your high school senior examinations. And when you can make a C on those, you can leave the building. I might as well just call the funeral home right then. I was a fairly good student. I did fine on my high school senior exams, but I don't remember any of it. And part of the reason is I didn't understand anything. I just tried to remember it. And the brain is a very lousy memorizing machine, with the exception of a few people who have a really photographic kind of memory and just don't lose anything. The rest of us, once we commit it to memory, it falls out pretty fast. A little faster for some than for others, but it falls out. So we haven't been taught in ways that promote understanding. And then a second thing that happens that's tough on us. Somebody says, some turkey like me or Tanya or somebody says, okay, let's look at this topic that you're teaching, this content you're teaching right now, and let's talk about what the key knowledge and skills and the big understandings are. Let's write those down. And we look and we think, I've been teaching that stuff for 12 years and I don't have a clue what the understandings are. I don't have any idea. And then you've sort of got two choices. You can either get really mad at Tanya, or you can get really mad at yourself. And neither of those is very satisfactory. As teachers, we have been taught that we're supposed to know everything, we're supposed to get it right, we're supposed to be perfect. You can't do that. You have to keep at it and keep at it. And so what I find with people when they do what you're talking about, which is sit down and really come to grips with that, it's almost like a death experience. You get mad and then you're in denial and then you want to leave the room. And ultimately, when you get through it, you're wiser. And I've had many teachers say to me, part of the way through that process, this is stupid, I don't have time for all this, I've got 1,000 things to do. I've been sitting here for 2 days looking at one unit, I can't do that, it's too long. And then by the end of the time, if they can stick with it, they'll say, I've been teaching this subject for 9 years, and this is the first time I understood what it meant. Can you imagine how much better it's going to be for my kids next year? And at that point, they're exuberant. We have to be willing to hang in and keep at it. Yes, I believe the backwards design is an important process. What it says is, up front, know what kids have to know, what they have to be able to understand, what they have to be able to do, what big questions, really kind of cosmic questions you want them to answer. And then say, what's evidence going to look like? What evidence will I accept at the end that they really got there? Now, how will I teach to get them there? It's a tightening process, and I do think that really is helpful. I see it succeed time after time with teachers and kids, and I don't know that I've ever really seen it fail. It's not easy. None of this is easy. But, you know, I don't know why we think teaching ought to be easy. What ought to be easy about putting you in a room with 30 squiggly bodies? I mean, if we thought that was easy, we went in the wrong door. We really did. It's just not easy. And by the way, with the standards, in the States, we are big on standards, but at this point at least, we have 50 different sets. We have 50 states, and every state has their own set. So there's some differences, but in general, the standards will give us the knows and the do's. It'll give us the knowledge and the skills. Seldom will it give us the understandings. There are professional groups that delineate those nicely so that we can look there and get some guidance from them. But what we do with the standards is say, go through them. Classify them as knows or do's or understands. If you got knows and do's without understands, add them yourself. If there's more knowledge you need to add, more skills you need to add, some skills you need to move to another unit, that's okay. Just add those, start from there, but don't finish there. Other thoughts or questions? Ooh, I love it that Tanya runs.
I have a question. If the concept of participation is in this concept of your differentiation. Participation, yes. It seems to me as if the teacher should do everything with this concept. And I think the pupil, him or herself, is responsible as well.
Wow. One of the best questions in the world. You mostly, I'm sure, know the work of Maria Montessori. She said one time, the biggest compliment you can pay a teacher is to be able to say, the students are working now as though you didn't exist. In other words, they know what to do so well that if you left the room, they just keep doing it because they honestly don't need you anymore. I used to direct plays with my middle school students, and middle school kids are funny on a stage. They can either walk or say the lines, but they find it very hard to walk and say the lines. So for a long time, you learn the lines, and then you start walking and they forget the lines. And then you have to work on the walking and the lines. And then you do a gesture. You need to kind of signal for the person to come across the stage. So do something like this, and the middle schooler goes, no, that one doesn't quite work. Watch me. Do this a little bit. And ultimately, they get to the place where they can do that, but then they forget to walk. And so you feel like a marionette person, pulling the strings, do this, do that. And then suddenly opening night comes, and you might as well leave town because they either have learned it or they haven't learned it. And I really think one of the most important insights about differentiation is building partnerships with kids in the classroom so that they take more and more ownership of their learning, but they also know better how to do it, so that they can support each other better, and so they can support you better, so that they know what they're supposed to know, understand, and do, so that they understand that that ongoing assessment process is to help make them better, not to put grades in a grade book, but to help them get better. And if they pay attention to that, listen, they'll pay attention to a coach that says if you kick the ball this way instead of that way, you'll do better, because they know it's true. And if they learn that about us, they'll do it. If they understand that what we're doing is having two things happen in the room today so that each of them can grow as much as possible, they work with us on it. And a huge part of an environment that supports differentiation is building a community of kids that support each other. So yes, for me, what you're asking is a fairly sophisticated understanding of differentiation. I don't necessarily see people who have seen themselves as the center of the universe in the classroom immediately give it over to students early on, but it pretty soon becomes apparent to you that that's the next step and that that's something you have to work with. Yeah. Let me see if there are any questions or comments that you'd like to raise at this point. Anything that percolated in your brain while you were out? Okay, what I want to try to do now is show you a little bit of Adam's 4 sequence of common sense decision steps. Each of these I'd love to spend a day with you on, or a week or a year. There's a great deal to think about in all of the pieces, because the truth is these 4 things are what we do when we teach. But I'm going to try really hard to watch the time and spend about 15 minutes or so on each of the 4 with you so that you get a little bit of a taste of it, and then Tanya and your other associates will be back working with them again. As I've watched teachers around the world with their students, one of the things I've come to understand is that having a learning environment that's worthy of that name, a learning environment. In other words, an environment that really is a catalyst for learning. Takes a lot of thought on a teacher's part. I don't think it's accidental. I don't think it just happens. I think teachers plan those environments just like they plan the lesson that's going to happen today. And my sense now as I look at things is that an effective learning environment first begins with me. It depends on where my head is, and I want to talk with you a little about that. If I can get my head in the right place about who the kids are and what needs to happen, then I think I stand a better chance of gaining their trust, of their looking at me like somebody who's on their side. In the States, we have the phrase, "I've got your back," meaning I'm watching you, you're covered, I'm taking care of you. I'd like to think my kids think I have their back, that I'm really looking out for them in any way that I can. And ultimately then, I think that can lead to a classroom that works like a really great team. On a great team, not everybody does everything exactly alike. People have different roles, but they come together for a common purpose. And my classes are best when they work like a team rather than like a group of disconnected people. So I want to share first with you a little bit about the idea of a learning environment, which is on Adam's list, the fourth sort of common sense decision. To me, it actually wraps around all the others. So my premise is the nature of the learning environment is going to predict the learning environment, the learning outcomes for a kid. One of the reasons that I knew I had to do something with Golden when he came in, one of the reasons I knew that I had to change the way I was thinking, was seeing his eyes look at mine. I want you to think about a 15-year-old boy who's been struggling for 15 years with the fact that he can't read. He's 3 weeks late coming to school. He's somehow gotten in the 7th grade where everybody else is 12. He walks up to this 6-foot-tall lady, and he had the courage to say to me, "I can't read." Mm-hmm. That was a huge trust, massive trust. And I somehow could not bring it about in my head to say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, have a nice year." You know, I can't do anything about that, not my problem. I somehow knew that he had made the first step, really saying to me in essence, can this year work for me? Can this place be okay for me? And I somehow had to help him feel accepted and respected, but not let off the hook. It wasn't that he didn't need to work. He needed to work harder than anybody else. He just needed a place to do that where it was going to work for him and where he could be a part of the group. Had we not been able to make that kind of environment for him, I don't think the learning would have happened. So I want to suggest to you quickly that my mindset, which I'll talk about, enables me to connect with kids in a way that builds their trust, which then enables me to build a community of learners. The concept of mindset, I think Tanya and some of her colleagues have talked with you about. It's a very powerful piece of work for me. It stems from the work of a woman named Carol Dweck, D-W-E-C-K. And she's been a professor in the United States, I guess, for 20 or 25 years. The work that she does has been joined in by professors around the world, many of them in Europe. And what they have found over the years is that by about 3 or 4 years old, kids begin to answer some really big questions in the world. It's not that they can always tell you that they're answering them, but their experiences help them find answers. So most 3-year-olds could tell you what love means, and they can tell you where they feel love and where they don't feel love, and they have a sense of what that means. A 3-year-old whose cat has died has a sense of loss. They may not have all the vocabulary, but they know something about the feeling, and they can identify with somebody else who has that feeling. And one of the questions that Dweck finds that very young children are beginning to answer and have by 3 or 4 developed a fairly clear handle on is the question of, what does it mean to be successful? What does it mean to be one of those people that are thought of well as being a successful person, somebody who does it right, somebody who gets ahead, the kind of person you want to be? And by about 3 or 4, she can see in kids around the world what she calls either a fixed mindset, or the second kind I'll show you in a minute that she calls a growth mindset. You and I also have a mindset. Now, you might have one mindset about sports and a different mindset about teaching and learning and a different mindset about fixing things around the house, but we have mindsets about things. And with a fixed mindset, in terms of teaching and learning, people with this mindset, and it may not be able to say it, they may not want to say it to you, but it's how they operate. Say, sure, I can tell you where success comes from. Successful students are those who are smart. And smart comes from heredity, and it comes from environment. So you show me some smart parents, and parents who value teaching. They read to their children. They show them museums, take them on trips. They plant in the garden with them and show them how things work. When you have a kid who has smart parents who spend time with them valuing learning, that's where success comes from. And as it happens, the way the world's set up for whatever reason, some kids are smart and some just aren't so smart. And teachers, because we're people of goodwill, try to help everybody as much as we can. But the truth of the matter is, my teaching can't really overcome poverty or disrupted families or lack of opportunity. And really bright kids are going to make it fine without me anyhow, because they're smart and that's what it takes to be successful. So they don't even really need me because they're ahead of the game anyhow. The alternative to that is what Dweck calls a growth mindset, or sometimes she calls it a fluid mindset. And those people say, I can tell you where success comes from, and it doesn't come from smart. Success comes from sweat. The person who works the hardest is the person who will succeed. Sweat is the great equalizer, the person who's really willing to work hard. There's a wonderful little book in the States by Malcolm Gladwell called The Outliers. I don't know if that's been translated over here or not. It's a wonderful piece. And he doesn't know anything about, I mean, he's not working on teaching and learning. What he's looking at is people in the world who've made a great big difference, and that's what he means by the outliers, people who've been extra successful. And his first chapter is called The Principle of 10,000 Hours. And what he finds is those people who have made a massive difference in their sphere have almost always logged in 10,000 hours of practice. The Beatles started out singing in some really lousy little European nightclubs. And the nightclub was cheap and didn't have much to give them, so they fed them. But they also wanted them to perform, like from 5 o'clock to 2 in the morning, day after day after day. So this little band that had a little bit of promise ended up practicing 2,000 hours by working in the nightclub until they became something really spectacular. And Gladwell documents that over and over and over. Ordinary people who do extraordinary practice can accomplish extraordinary things. And what people who study the brain tell us, and we didn't know this 15 years ago, we didn't know it 10 years ago, you can exercise your brain and make it really strong in the same way you can exercise your body and make it strong. And so what people like Dweck say is, one of the most important things you and I can do is to believe that virtually all of our kids can do anything as long as they work hard enough, and our job is to see that they do. So people with a growth mindset say, with hard work, almost anybody can do almost anything. And in fact, teachers can override kids' profiles. We can take a child from poverty, a child from a humble background. We can take a kid who's bright and show them how much further they have to go and make them incredibly capable. We can override what comes to us because the brain is changeable. And if we believe that about our students and they believe it about themselves, amazing things can happen. So what our job is if we have a fluid mindset, is to say, here's a very high ceiling. Let me help you get to it. I would have to tell you, I have a friend who says anytime you point a finger of blame at somebody else, you need to remember that 3 are pointing back at you. And I can tell you nearly everything that any teacher does wrong that I've done in my teaching. I've been right there, I remember it, I understand it, and sometimes I'm sad, very sad about it. And one of the things that I'm really sad about is in the early years of my teaching, where we did what many people do around the world. As educators, we decided who was smart and who wasn't smart. And we put the smart kids in one set of classes and the not so smart kids in another set of classes. And I heard all the teachers around me talk. And inevitably, every year, I got a really struggling remedial class third period right before lunch. They'd had it, they wanted to go to lunch already, and of all the places they didn't want to come, it was English, because that's the thing that was the hardest for them. And I'd see those kids come, and I wasn't a bad person. I was just in a system that I accepted. And I'd think, okay, I can't be as happy with these kids as I am with the other classes. And I can't do really meaningful work with them because they can't really handle the abstraction. And I'm going to have to be a lot sterner with my rules, and we're going to have a really tight ship here. And what I did was think down about them, and I taught down to them. And meantime, who they're surrounded with is other kids who aren't performing very well. And not surprisingly, they also all had fixed mindsets. I'm in this class because I'm stupid. I'm in this class because I can't do stuff academically. School is not my thing. I don't belong here. I know what the other classes that you teach fourth and fifth period are doing, and you're not doing with that with us, and it's because I'm not capable of doing it. They know all those things. What's fascinating to me now is to be in schools where people have said that's not good enough because we make too many mistakes. And there are a lot of kids who could do amazing stuff if we treated them like they could do amazing stuff. So what if I put those kids in a class where I teach them the best stuff, and then I differentiate to lift them up? Because I believe they can do the stuff with the support system. That may sound like Pollyanna, may sound like theory, may sound silly. It's quite powerful. I hope all of you in your own experience can think of those moments where somebody believed you could do something, and because they believed it, you did, when you wouldn't have had they not believed it. Really huge issue. I want to show you a class for a second with a teacher talking to her kids, and actually I'm going to show you a couple of minutes of me talking before that. But look at why this teacher is talking with her kids about this mindset stuff. Somebody was asking about kid involvement in stuff. Why would you talk to kids about a thing like mindset? What might it accomplish? When you think about a teacher who believes in mindset enough to really talk with her kids about it throughout the year and try to help them develop a growth mindset about themselves and about each other, what do you think that might accomplish in a classroom? And can you think of any way that you might involve your kids in thinking about their own mindset? A struggling kid who has a fixed mindset wants to quit all the time. They do the minimum they can to get by. A bright kid with a fixed mindset does not want you to push them because they believe that smart people don't have to work. If you're smart, you should be able to get it easily, and they don't like the challenge. So how might you involve your kids in moving beyond that? And what might you need to do? This is a really great question beyond just talking with the kids about mindset. How can you prove to them that they're capable of almost anything? What would you have to do to prove that to them and to yourself? Well, let's take just a second here and look at this middle school teacher talking with her kiddos. Teacher's mindset affects everything in the classroom. It affects the environment, because if teachers see winners and losers, students will see them seeing the winners and losers, and it's hard for the students to come together. A great coach almost has to have a growth mindset, has to believe they can beat that team Friday night, or they can handle whoever's on the court the next time, and to encourage the team members, individually and as a group, to rise above their limitations. And that's what we need to do in a classroom, is to have a teacher who says, you guys have no idea how much ability you have individually, and if we all come together, there's no telling what we can do. So let's just move forward. And it's very, very helpful in building trust between the teacher and individual students. But it really is a lot of the glue that brings a community together.
So I want you to think for a minute about some kids who you consider to be really smart. in 6th grade or maybe in another grade. And I want you to start writing in your notebook, what do you think makes those kids so smart?
An article called You Can Grow Your Brain that describes in grade level kind of language for middle school the research that's been done that shows that people are not born smart or dumb, and that they actually can, as the article says, grow their brains and through practice get better at anything. And a really powerful analogy is used in the article about weightlifting.
The child's brain has changed. It has gotten stronger and smarter. Just like a weightlifter's big muscles make her stronger. The real truth about smart and dumb.
Students seem to really be able to make sense of that analogy and come away with understanding that they, no matter where they are, whether they've considered themselves one of the smart kids or one of the dumb kids, can grow, can progress from wherever they're starting, and they see each other in that way, that they all can grow, and they really, and maybe this is one of the most important things to come out of the article in terms of building classroom community, aren't exactly comfortable using the words smart and dumb anymore.
You have to choose one of these. Number one, to explain how you can grow your brain. Just using a few sentences to explain what the authors have to say about that. Next choice, so if you don't do number one, you could do number two, compare the brain to a muscle.
I don't hesitate to say that it's probably the most important thing that I do at the beginning of the year, because it does require students to take ownership. When they struggle with something, it really is just that they need practice, and so knowing that they have the power to grow, they're willing to get the practice and to do what it takes.
Okay, let me get you for a second to go back to these questions, or just to think about for a minute with your own teaching. Why would you talk with kids about mindset? How might it help anything? But a really important question is, once this teacher says to kids, I believe pretty nearly any of you can learn pretty nearly anything if you're willing to work hard enough to do it, what is the teacher's responsibility then? If you say that to your kids, what's your responsibility? Talk with each other about these questions, but also that one for just a minute. Is it useful to work with the mindset thing, with yourself, with kids? By the way, a great question is, what structures in your schools are fixed mindset structures? And what structures are growth mindset structures? Big deal, because kids know. Talk about that just a minute. If I didn't have her word for it, what I would say is how I see people, how I see the world. And really, for that time in my teaching that makes me sad, I saw some smart kids that could do things and some unsmart kids that couldn't. It was my predisposition, it was my worldview, it was my outlook on things. I guess just belief system, might work well enough, but it's a belief system about smartness and success and who can be smart and who can't. Talk about those questions just a minute. I want us to just kind of keep going with this for a minute. All this is just something for you to start doing some thinking. I've come to believe that my mindset affects everything in the classroom. I can tell you that there was a time when my students knew who I thought was smart and who I thought wasn't smart. And I think from the beginning, those that I thought weren't smart lost trust in me. There wasn't so much reason to work hard. There wasn't so much reason to put out. My mindset shapes my students' mindset. I can remember being in a class a few years ago where some kids were doing something new in math and it was very difficult for them. And the teacher was walking around trying to work with them and help them as they were trying these things out. And this little kid looked at her, middle school kid looked at her with real, almost fear. And she said to her, "This is really hard." And the teacher said something back that really wowed me, and I thought it shouldn't have. It's the right answer. The teacher looked at her and said, "Well, of course it is, and you can do hard things." And the kid kind of went, "Oh." And you could sort of see her shift there. I asked you what a teacher's responsibility would be if you told kids that they could accomplish almost anything. It calls for differentiation. It means I have to lift stuff up a step from where you are, and then another step, and then another step, and then another step. I can't say jump across the Alps, but I can say go up 2 feet further today. And so I have to sort of know where the kid is and keep raising it a bit every time so that they can see success happen, and that's hugely important. When I saw all of my students as capable, many more of them saw themselves as capable. And when they came to believe that I was crazy enough to think they were all smart, they looked a lot smarter. It affects the environment because when kids think I have favorites, and teachers are supposed to like smart kids, so if I like the smart ones better, then the others are down on my list, and they don't trust me as much because they can tell that difference. It affects what I teach. If we believed that all kids were smart, we would start with the curriculum we teach smart kids and figure out how to teach it to everybody. But at least in the States, we remediate kids we believe can't be smart. And we accelerate kids that are smart. And when you've got one group that's forever going slower and everybody else is moving on, the chances that they're ever going to catch up are zero. It just can't happen. And it's going to affect how I teach. If I believe that all kids are capable of learning what I'm teaching, as long as they work hard and I do, I almost have to do some kind of differentiation. It doesn't have to look like the ladies next door or the guy down the hall, but I have to do something to make that happen. If I believe that life is such that some of them are going to get it and some of them aren't, then it's easy for me to say all I have to do is cover it. And the ones of them that'll get it are going to get it and the others just can't, and that's how life is. It's really big stuff, really big stuff. So if I have a growth mindset, in other words, if I can communicate to a kid, I'm so delighted you're here. I have a ton of stuff to learn from you, and you have a ton of stuff to learn from me, and we're going to work really, really hard. Then I stand a chance of connecting with kids, of really building trust. One writer said teachers discover that they need to develop and maintain personal relationships with the students they teach, because for most students, meaningful interaction with a teacher is a precursor to academic learning. In other words, if I think you like me, if I think you get me, if I think you're on my wavelength, I'm willing to work for you. And if I think you're ignoring me or disrespecting me or discounting me, I'll do what I have to survive, but I'm not going to give you anything. Here's what you and I do. In September or August, kids show up here, and we say to them, wouldn't you like to jump across this chasm? I'm going to teach this whole year of English to you, this whole year of history that you know nothing about. Don't you want to jump across that vacuum that's there right now? And the kids kind of go, not so much. And our job is to say, but see, I'm the bridge. I'm going to get you to that other side. You have no choice but to go, but I'm there for you. And I'll work with you to do what it needs to happen to get you to that other side. Middle school is hard because kids come and go and there are too many of them and you'll never have perfect knowledge of them. But when you do these things, you can connect. My first year of teaching in high school, I taught next door to Ms. Gardner, who was teaching her last year. And she was as wonderful as I was awful. And she was great to me. Every once in a while, she would just say some little thing that was really wise. And I always knew it was wise. I just didn't know how to get there. She never seemed like she was, trying to be better than I was. She was just trying to help a little bit or say something that might give me a better compass. And one day she said to me, I consider that I've had a good day at school if every student has a personal Ms. Gardner story to tell at the end of the day. And I can remember thinking, there are 150 of them. How are they supposed to have a personal Ms. Tomlinson story at the end of every day? But what I realized eventually, of course, is if you do these things, they do have that. They have a personal Ms. Tomlinson story to tell because I told a funny story to the whole class and they think it belongs to each of them. Or because I whisper to them as they're working around the room, or because I stand in the door. It's something that says, I see you, and I care that I see you. And that matters profoundly, especially to young adolescents. I love this example. This is a high school teacher, and the kids are reading the novel Lord of the Flies, but I don't really care what's down here. I just want you to see this. Every time he gives the kids any activity that's on a sheet of paper, he puts something on there like this to get a little bit of personal information from them. So they're getting ready to have a group discussion on what they've read in Lord of the Flies, but at the top of the paper, he says, what's your name, what's your date, what's the class period, and what's been the best thing about this week for you? I started doing that with my graduate differentiation class this year. Tell me what's happened this week. What's the best thing that's happened? What's the worst thing that's happened? Good grief, I can't tell you how much better I know that class than if I had not done that. And it took about 2 minutes. And I know that class better than any other one like that I've ever taught because I did that little piece. And so I knew a student to keep saying, so how are the wedding plans going? And another student she's probably 20, and she has a 4-year-old brother, and she's so proud of him learning to ride his bicycle. So every week I could say, so what's he doing now? What's he doing now? And she'd just light up like a Christmas tree. Matters to me because I'd rather teach people than sticks any day, but it matters to them because they think I care about them as people. Sometimes he puts up here something like, what do you wish you were doing rather than being in this class right now? That's courageous. How are you feeling about the novel we're reading? What's your favorite movie or favorite TV show or favorite game these days? Do you like hot dogs? You can't answer no to that in Austria. What are you worried about? But always saying, I want to know a little more, I want to know a little more, I care that you're there. Dennis Littke says, I'd like to say that as teachers, our job's just to cover the material, to make the kids a little smarter, get them to think better, get them to show up better at graduation. But he said, in my school, we have come to understand that education is about the 3 R's. And this probably doesn't translate to German too well, but in English, we talk about the 3 R's as reading, writing, and arithmetic, because they all sound like they've got R's in the beginning. And he says the real 3 R's for teaching are relationships, relevance, and rigor. Those 3 first, and then reading and writing and arithmetic. Relationships is... Yeah, that's a great question. Rigor is something that stretches you mentally. It's something that makes you struggle mentally to get it. It's a little too hard for you. It pushes your capacity to think. Challenge. Yeah, and challenge, what's challenging for one of you may not be challenging for the person next to you. It's something that's a little too hard for you and causes you to have to stretch and stand tall to get there. And he says, and I believe he's correct, here's the truth, guys, you can't have a relationship with or make things relevant for or know what challenge means for a kid that you don't know anything about. So that notion of connecting with them as a vehicle for teaching is really important. Then if we're lucky, the kids come to think, he really does kind of think we're cool. He sort of seems to trust all of us. He wants to know more about us. And then they begin to trust each other better. If I see some as winners and some as losers, they're going to see each other as winners and losers. If I see all of them as members on this team that we're weaker without, then they'll begin to see each other that way as well. And we do that by listening to one another, learning to respond with caring and with respect, having problems to solve together, being a team, celebrating when we get it right, and correcting when we get it wrong. And doing that often enough makes a difference. I want to share with you a thing. Actually, this was a junior high class, lady that taught next door to me. She was teaching a group of kids pre-algebra who thought they were lousy math students. And, you know, she could have said they can't learn pre-algebra. They just don't have the skill. But what she said is, of course they'll learn it in my class. They'll get it before they get out of here or die trying. But a lot of days, the stuff was very hard for them, and they had to do it over and over and over to get it right. And understanding that it was hard for them, what she did was to get them to develop what she called math jeers. I don't know what do you all have cheerleaders in?
Yeah, we know we don't.
Not really.
It's familiar. Cheering, though you probably, cheerleaders, but jeering,
Yeah.
you know, this is a word play. When you, I don't know the word in German.
Making fun of, kind of.
Making fun of.
Yeah.
So it's the opposite of what a cheerleader would do.
You know, a cheerleader says, rah, rah, this is wonderful, you're going to be great, you can make the touchdown, and it rhymes, and, you know, they do little jingles and things, and then the whole crowd shouts it with them. You've seen it in movies and stuff, I'm sure. What she did was math jeers, and so the kids wrote these little jingles that were like cheers, but it was about how much they hated formulas, or how much they hated the letter Y, or how much they hated fractions, and each kid could write a jeer and then teach it to the class. And so the kids would get really frustrated, and she could tell, you know, the whole class was just getting antsy because stuff wasn't working. And she'd stop them and she'd say, okay, who wants to come up and lead us in a math jeer? And somebody, yeah, I do. And so they'd come up and teach the class the math jeer, and the whole group would get up and do the clapping and holler and do whatever it was. And she'd say, do you feel better now? And the kids would say, uh-huh. And she'd say, okay, get back to work. And and she did. I saw her do it 1,000 times. But what happened was they got to be the class that did the math jeers. That was part of their community, as well as she doesn't let us off the hook. You know, she lets us get some steam out of the way, but then she makes us work again. And it was an identity for them, exactly like having a team mascot in soccer or football would be an identity thing. So that's what she would do with them when they were having a tough time. Here's what I think a learning environment needs to be. Because my teacher treats me with respect, I feel a sense of dignity in this place. Because my teacher treats every one of us with respect, we're respectful of one another. Because my teacher sees our possibilities, I'm beginning to see them too. Because my teacher says sweat makes winners, we're learning to sweat. Because my teacher works hard for me, I want to work hard for her. Because my teacher won't settle for less than our best, we aim high more often. Because my teacher says we are responsible for one another, we help one another succeed. Because my teacher helps us see ourselves through her eyes, we see hope in ourselves. Because my teacher is a great coach, we're a great team. And that's the way I think it builds. I don't think you have a great environment because you have cute posters on the wall, or because the teacher knows jokes and is cute and sarcastic. I don't think you have a great environment because, you know, kids work together on a worksheet. I think this sequence is what makes it happen. And I think especially with middle school, everywhere you can see the difference with that. I want to share with you another video clip for a minute. That sort of summarizes this section on mindset and environment, looking at the idea of mindset to connections to community. This is a group of kids that did not want to come to school. And not only did they not want to come to school, if they could have skipped any subject, it would have been this one. It would have been writing, because writing and reading is what they can't do, and it makes them feel stupid all the time. So I want you to look at this teacher and determine what you think her mindset is. Is she a fixed mindset person or a fluid one? In other words, is her belief system that almost any kid can learn almost anything if they'll work hard enough? Or is it that some kids are smart and some kids aren't smart? To what degree do you think this teacher connects as a human being with these kids? And on what evidence would you say that? Do you see a sense of community and trust among the students in here? And why do you say yes or no? And then most particularly, if your answer is yes to all those questions, what would change if your answer were no? And if your answer is no, what would change if it were yes? In other words, academically, what difference does mindset, connections, and community make in this classroom?
In the last century, the world has changed. It has changed dramatically.
And using Community Resource Program, we'll visit several high school classrooms where we'll see how teachers use a variety of instructional strategies that put students actively at the center of their learning. One such strategy is journaling. Tracy Wagner has students keep journals in her writing class at Charlestown High School in Boston. Every Friday, she gives her students a chance to connect their journaling activity to their personal interests.
Everyone looks forward to Writer's Friday. I bring in a kind of poetry or a model of a short story.
Today the choice I'm going to show you is called writing a two-person perspective poem. So let's review a little. What does the word perspective mean? Who knows? Danielle, thank you.
Point of view.
It's like a point of view.
What you think about it?
I present a really brief lesson, which is a choice that they'll have for the day.
Think about the ideas, the organization, the voice, the word choice, the sentence fluency, right? How the punctuation is on the end, the long and the short, and the conventions of the poem. But you know in here we're reading the poem like a writer to figure out how it's written. How many people are saying this poem? 2. How do we know that? Who can tell me? How do we know? Alexis.
Because one's in regular light text and the other one's in bold text.
Fantastic.
And then the bulk of class is writing time, where I believe students should have a choice of things to write. It's a time that they can depend on in which to express themselves about something that may have happened that week. It's a little bit more relaxed.
You can write in the two-person perspective poetry style. I'd love to see that. Or you can write something else today if that moves you. That's fine.
I was curious when I decided to do this to see who they would choose to represent in the poem. And I was interested that a lot of the boys chose fathers and sons, mine knowing that their fathers aren't a big part of their lives. A lot of the poems are very autobiographical. There's one girl who put herself in the perspective of a family member that she's been having a lot of internal conflicts about. And it's also always remarkable to me, and I've had them for 2 years now, how quickly they are able to just get right into it, write something, be proud of it, and want to share it. And we've worked very hard on that.
About 5 more minutes.
Then the last 10 to 15 minutes of class are sharing.
I am a boy. I'm a boy. I'm a boy born as a crack baby. I'm a boy born to a wealthy lady. I'm a boy that grew up tough. I'm a boy that never had it rough. I'm a boy that lived the street life. I'm a boy that lived the sheltered life. I'm a boy that sit to the beat. I'm a boy that can't go dancing without tripping over my feet. I'm a boy. I'm a boy. I'm a boy that weathered the storm and kept it bold. I'm a boy that drank hot chocolate when it was cold. I'm a boy who decided I wanted a new life. I'm a boy who became a statistic to peer pressure and started carrying a knife. I'm a boy who wanted to change. I'm a boy that is doing 15 in life in the bed.
When I first met them last year, they would never call themselves writers, ever. They were very hesitant to read anything out loud. And so this has been a year and a half now of really working on this level of confidence and writing ability. They are very good writers.
That kind of journaling that allows for that creative
I want to go back to what she said there at the end to make sure that you had that, because it's critical. When these kids came to school, they didn't read, they didn't write. They certainly would not share anything with anybody. They would not read anything aloud. They now are obviously trusting of one another, willing to put stuff on paper. She clearly knows how to teach them to write. But I think there are a lot of people who could have stood up and taught them how to write and never gotten them to write. what role do you think her mindset, connections between the teacher and the kid, and being a classroom community plays in their success as writers? And what do you think would change if these things were different? So talk about those three things for a minute. Growth mindset or fixed, and why do you say so? Do you see any evidence that she connects as a human being with those kids? And if so, what? Do you think it makes, there actually is a sense of trust and team in there? Or are the kids suspicious of one another? And what difference does that make in their learning? Talk about that with each other for a minute. Sometime when you have a minute, think back on those teachers that changed you. My guess is that in almost every case, you knew they believed in you. You knew they were investing in you. They connected you in some sort of meaningful way and made the stuff come to life. At least that's been the case for me. The mindset piece, I think, is really powerful. Thoughts or questions about that? About learning environment, mindset, connections, community? What do you think about that class? Have any of you ever taught that class? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just saying in our conversation.
We need to give you the microwave.
Microwave.
Get a microwave oven.
Zap yourself there.
I was just saying in our conversation, I did teach in an inner city in New York City in the Bronx. And one thing that really stood out to me was that I remember as far as being a white teacher in a predominantly Hispanic and black classroom, the first thing that they see is color. Once you gain their trust, color disappears. There's no such thing. And I've seen both aspects of it within the first week of school, or even throughout like two years of school. As soon as the kids know that you're not there for them, color is the first thing that comes up, and it's over. There's no more teaching. So, yeah.
In the U.S., of course, the black, white, Latino thing is big. And if I'm white, then I'm different than you. If I'm black, I'm supposed to be on your side if you're black. That same dynamic, though, happens in classes where that's not there. You're the teacher, you're smart, you're not going to like me. Or you're the person who knows stuff, I don't. Or I come from a place that doesn't have much money and you have more opportunity than I have, and therefore you don't understand me and you don't get me. I think those barriers are there from 1,000 different sources. And what's interesting to me, again, is she got past the barrier, which in her case probably was color. Interestingly to me, though, she's not teaching them junk. If you saw the rubric that was on the screen, she's teaching them college prep writing. So she's not lowering her expectations for them. She's teaching them the stuff that kids that achieve learn. It's that she's able to do that through the trust and mindset, I think. I think it's really powerful, worth thinking about anyway. Okay, now I'm going to really truck here. Adam's second premise was that the nature of our curriculum is important. And as I said to you before, this may be the hardest of the things to work with. And it's something certainly that we could talk on for a long time this afternoon, but I want to try to make a point or two here with you quickly. And to do that, I want to show you two examples. This comes from a classroom in a middle school science classroom where the students were studying the solar system. And the kids had been reading the textbook and doing the exercises and, answering questions and listening to the teacher lecture and all the stuff that we do in classrooms. And then one day she said to the kids, I want to give you a chance today to work on something that you might particularly enjoy. And so what I want to ask you to do is to adopt a planet. Pick any planet that we've been studying that's kind of interesting to you, except Earth. You can't pick Earth, but any of the others. And then I'm going to assign you to a group. Now, she could have said choose one, but she didn't, and I'll come back to that in a minute. She's using Howard Gardner's notion of multiple intelligences here. So if you pick the planet Neptune and she assigned you to the verbal linguistic group, then your assignment was to find some information about Neptune and then write a story about that planet. If your planet was Neptune and she assigns you to the logical mathematical task, then your job is to make a chart that compares your planet to Earth. If your planet is Neptune and she puts you in the musical rhythmic group, then your job is to write a song about Neptune. And if your song is, your planet is Neptune, or I better use Saturn here, and she puts you in this bodily kinesthetic group, then your job is to make up a game about your planet. And the example she gave them is, if you're studying Saturn, you might want to do a Saturn ring toss, because Saturn's got rings around it. So I watched that class and actually saw how that played out. And afterwards, the teacher asked me for some feedback. So I want to ask you to do what the teacher asked me to do. And what I tried to do with her was tell her something that I thought that she was on the right track with, something good that she was thinking about or doing. And then a step for growth next time. Here's something you might work on next time to make it even stronger. So what is she perhaps doing that's worth congratulations? And what is she doing that probably needs some more of her attention? Turn to somebody and literally for a few seconds say what you think. I think the answers might be evident to you. Not just one answer, of course, but there are possibilities. What do you think? What are you going to tell her she is promising that she's doing? What does she need to attend to more? Do that for just a second. Okay, let's see what you think. Somebody tell me something that you could say to her, I think it's good that you did this. I think it probably was helpful that you did this. What's one thing you could tell her that's positive? You can't tell the lady anything that's any good?
She gave them choice. Yeah.
A choice is not a bad thing. They had a choice on the planet. And you might find that it would have been wiser if she'd also given them a choice on the task, and I would agree with that. What she's doing is assigning them to an intelligence based on what she thinks they're good at. That's pretty dicey. That doesn't fit in with the research that we know. I shouldn't assign that you're a kinesthetic person and you're a musical person, so probably would have been better if she'd given them both choices. But I think it's pretty commendable that she created choices and that she gave the kids choices. And as I watched it, it was a very good thing that the kids knew how to go get their material and they worked on it seriously and they sat and worked seriously on their projects. And the classroom had a sense of movement in it, but it was all purposeful and you wouldn't have thought it was crazy or chaotic. The kids were really doing what they needed to do, and that's a good thing. What would you tell her that she needs to work on a little bit next time?
For example, tell the kids what's the destination, why do this, what for?
Why are we doing this, what for? What else would you say, or would you elaborate on that any?
Well, I would also say that it sounds the way you described it, it sounds like she did this quite late in the whole program and the unit. And I'm wondering what she was doing from the beginning onwards.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good question. You might say early on to get them interested, find a planet you'd like to know something about, get a little information, and now we'll keep building on that. That might have been good. My real concern with this is that if I were a kid, I would have no idea what I'm supposed to accomplish. I don't know what good would look like. Am I supposed to just get 2 facts? Or would 10 facts be better? Do they need to help me understand anything about the planet, or is just some facts and words okay in there? I don't know why we're doing this thing. And that's a big issue.
Although depending on what you're looking for, I mean, also as a teacher, what your goal is, right? Because these things to me are quite open, open task. There is no sort of what I really expect. So it can be a creative thing as well in it. This is what I said, without knowing what in the sense of have to do or what is expected in the sense of, right?
But
so,
doing it for a grade, right?
But this is something I don't know.
We don't know.
Do we?
That's
Do we?
Assuming.
Okay. If it's for a grade, so the task, I would change the task.
Yeah. I mean, I think really, you know, we're all nice people and we all want to be kind to people, so maybe she was doing this and perhaps this would have been good and maybe this would have been redeeming. I don't know, I'm not proud of myself any day when I don't know where the kids are supposed to come out at the end of the day, and I really have no idea what this is about. So one of the things, by the way, I call this with, I don't know how this translates in German, but I call this with my students Twinkie differentiation. It's silly, it's fluffy, it's pointless, it's airheaded, it's meaningless, really. It's just to sort of say you did different things, but it accomplishes no particular purpose, probably. It could be that it's a freeing up day or that it's a creativity day, but you ought not to have to do those things too often without some academic purpose along with it. I don't know where you all are in Austria, but this speaks to us in the States. This pharmacist is talking to the customer and he says, have somebody cram one of these down your throat every 6 hours. And our teachers feel that way because we're cramming information down throats to prepare kids for tests all the time, which you all aren't so big on. But kids often feel like, you know, we're just cramming stuff in them, you know, learn it, learn it, learn it, learn it. And they don't really get why, and it's not particularly appealing. I tell my students that when they create curriculum for me, and this is based on what we know about the brain and what causes learning to be meaningful, they have to have a plan to engage kids, and they have to demonstrate that the kids will come away understanding something important, something important. When the kids are engaged, in other words, if they really want to do what we ask them to do, we're way ahead of the game. And if they understand something critical when they finish, great day. Her task was engaging. That's why the kids behaved and did it. They found it very engaging. They liked doing it. They didn't mind putting out the effort, but it resulted in no understanding whatsoever. And you really need both of those things. So I want to show you an alternate example here and see what you think about this. This is a strategy called a think-tac-toe, and it was created by a middle school English teacher who had her students write book reports every semester. Does Austria do book reports? Yeah. Yes. Well, she said to me at the end of this summer, I had a moment of truth over the summer, and I decided two things, and it changed me. The first one, she said, is if I ever have to read another book report, I may become violent. And I understood that. And the second thing she said is, you know, it occurred to me that the reason I assign book reports is that I don't trust kids to read the books unless they write them up. And that lack of trust started bothering me. So she said, surely I can do something with them that causes them to think more deeply rather than just summarize the plot and kind of plunk it in there. So I want to show you this. I debated on which order to show it to you in, but decided to do it this way on purpose. When the kids got this, it did not say advanced version at the top. This is just for us. But kids in her class who are very good readers, very good writers, everybody got to choose their own book, so that you can choose a book that challenges you and that's on a topic you're interested in. But what she asked them to do was to do the activities so you would get a tic-tac-toe, so you can go down, or you can go across, or you can go this way, but you have to do one from each line. So you can't do 3 character ones and nothing else. You have to get one on each line, but either straight down, you know, one of the 3 or across. And you can't see this too well, but there are 2 things here. She said to the kids, select and complete one activity from each horizontal row to help you and other people who are going to see your work think deeply about this novel. Remember to make your work thoughtful, original, insightful, and elegant in expression. She met with those kids at some point, and they did little cards that they posted on the wall. What does thoughtful look like? How will you know if something's thoughtful? How will you know if something's original? How will you know if something's insightful? So she helped them understand what those things would mean, and the little cards were up for that. She told the kids that what she wanted them to know was the terms setting, character, and theme. what she wants them to do is connect literary terms with their own experience. In other words, to come to understand theme more deeply by thinking about your own life, understand setting by thinking about places in your own life. And what she wants them to understand, which is the part you can't see, is all of us every day live out our own stories. Our lives are stories, and we write them as we live. So your life today has a plot, it has a setting, it has characters in it. There will be conflicts in your brain or with conversations or arguments or demands on your time. We write and live our own stories as we go around day by day. So the kids might decide to write a bio poem about themselves and another about the main character in the book so that readers could see how you and that character are alike and different. Be sure you include the most important traits in each poem. Or a character's being written up in the newspaper 20 years after the novel ends. Write the article about that character 20 years later. Where has life taken him or her, and how did they get from the novel to where they were 20 years later? How did that play out? Now write up yourself 20 years from now. Where will you be, and what will the steps be that get you there? Does that make sense, sort of? Yeah. Find several songs that you think reflect an important message from the book and prepare an audio collage of those songs, and then write an exhibit card that helps a listener understand how you think these songs capture the book's meaning. What do you think about this? Yeah. Does it have engagement? Yes. How about understanding? Yeah. You could see these kids going with the notion, I am kind of like a character, aren't I? If I understand them, I kind of understand me better. If I understand me better, I kind of understand them better. I mean, those conversations were really there. I found a song that's just like this character in the book, and they'd get so excited about doing that. This is the version that she gave to kids who were more advanced than grade level in her class. Here's the other version, which when kids got it did not say basic version. It's just for us. Their directions are select and complete one activity from each horizontal row to help you and other people think about your novel. Make sure your work is thoughtful, original, accurate, and detailed. And she talked with that group about what those things mean. They made the cards for them. And look at the difference here. Thoughtful, original, insightful, elegant. Really advanced kids can already do original, accurate, and detailed. So she's pushing them further. That's what rigor is. It's pushing them a little further than they think they can go on it. But look at the choices here. Create a pair of collages that compares you and a character from the book. Compare and contrast your physical and personality traits. Label your collages so viewers understand your thinking. Now, this would have been easy for the basic group if they just had to compare physical characteristics, but comparing psychological characteristics as well is much more challenging. Make a model or a map of a key place in your life and an important one in the novel. Find a way to help viewers understand why your special place is special to you and why the setting impacts the characters in the novel. And you could really see the kids getting that setting notion when they'd say, you know, when I go to my grandma's house, it feels really special because, and I have this room and I can do these things there. And then they'd think about what was going on in the novel, and the whole thing just mattered much more to them. What should the kids know? Setting, character, and theme. What should they do? They should connect literary terms with their own experiences. And what should they understand? That we live out our own stories. So what has happened between this version and this one? What's similar and what's different? What do you think?
Well, the same is what the kids should know, do, and understand. And different is the ways to get there, and also the level of complexity.
Yeah. she said the similarity is the knows, understands, and do's are the same, and that should nearly always be the case. What you need to teach them is what you need to teach them wherever they are. What's different is this one is more complex. The degree of difficulty is higher. I don't know how degree of difficulty translates in German, but in the Olympics you see, a diver that has a lower degree of difficulty or a higher degree. They still have to have the attributes of a good diver, the same principles of diving. It's just a more complex dive if it has a higher degree of difficulty. This teacher, I could say, I think you did fine with the engagement piece, and I think the kids will come away understanding more. This, to me, is more substantial curriculum, more substantial differentiation than the little Twinkie, let's just do something different thing.
It's also connection, because I think it's also connection, right? Because of the, they put themselves in that place, right? Tells a lot about their own lives.
Yes, that's really her big hope, is to help them do that connection between the elements in a novel and what goes on in their own lives. And that connecting is hugely important to them. I'd bet you my lunch money that they came away knowing much more about setting and plot, setting characters and theme, than if they had just had to write those out or find them in a book or complete a worksheet or something. So this teacher's been teaching, oh, no, the other point that I wanted to make to you and why I showed it to you in this order, she created this one first. And then she said, what changes do I need to make so that more kids can get to it? And that principle for me is extremely important. It's the principle of teaching up. She didn't say, how can I remediate stuff? She said, how can I create something that's pretty darn powerful and then modify it a little bit so more kids can get to it? And so that means that every kid has very clear KUDs, knowledge, understanding, and skill. No matter who they are, they have to really think. No matter who they are, there's a focus on understanding. They have problems to solve in terms of how they're going to express what they're doing. They have to use the key knowledge and skills to explore the understanding. All of these things are things that we do with kids we believe in. And she started with the more advanced version. And then she said, let me work with that to give it a slightly lower degree of difficulty, but not to remove any of these things. Does that make sense to you? That's hard, man. Good curriculum's hard. It just really is hard. I'm sorry, but it is. You have to know stuff. You have to think yourself. And for me, I'll tell you a funny story with this curriculum class I teach every fall. I've been teaching really since I think the Alps were forming. I feel like I've done it 1,000 years. And every year, just to keep myself from being bored, I say, how do I do it differently? What can I bring in? How can I improve it? About 3 years ago, my teaching assistant came in kind of shyly in May, and she said, would you mind if I volunteered to teach the curriculum class with you next year? And I'm thinking, free help? No, that's okay with me. That'll do fine. And I said, no, Christy, that'd be great. I'd be really honored. So we had a conversation, and she said, how would it be if I went home and thought about the course this summer and came back with some suggestions in the fall? And it'd be easy to say, what are you talking about? I'm 100 years old and you're 12 and I know everything and you don't know anything. But I've long since learned that people know a lot of stuff. And I said, wow, I think that'd be excellent. So she came back and she said, I've spent the whole summer thinking about this. And I think I have a way we can frame this with an essential question, a big idea, that will make the whole thing kind of tie together in a different way. And her question for the course was, where does meaning come from in curriculum? And I thought, oh, shoot, man, I've done this 110 ways. And I never got that. So since then, of course, I've been teaching it around where does meaning come from in curriculum, and I'm waiting for my next volunteer. But all of the things that she did improved all of that work that I'd done. I think one of the things that's hard for us as teachers is not to say, well, I got the unit done, I'll teach it this way for the next 100 years. But again, what do I do to tighten the understanding, to enhance the engagement, continue to improve it? The Japanese call that polishing the stone. And the idea they think is that the first time we create a unit, it's kind of like a rock. It's craggy and dirty and jagged. And every time we go back to it, we smooth it out a little bit. It's smoother and shinier every time. If we do that, we're in a different place. Okay, I'm going to have to stop here, but I'm going to do one more thing because I want to...
One more question?
Yes, you bet.
How do students take one or the other version?
Oh, that's a very important question.
What was the...
Do they choose? Does she let them choose? Does she...
Okay, no, that's a great question. How do they know which task to do? How do they know which assignment to do? Sometimes it makes sense to let kids choose. Your colleague who was saying, you know, what role do kids have in this? Don't we want them to have more voice? My general take on that is that much of the time when it's a, not always, but much of the time when it's a readiness-based task, I assign. When it's an interest or learning profile-based task, I let them choose. And more as they come to understand what they're doing in differentiation and what it means to challenge themselves, I begin to guide them in choosing the readiness-based tasks as well. But if I have some assessment data that tells me that you need a particular thing, I'm going to give you that task tomorrow. There's no point in having the assessment data and then let you choose the wrong thing. So I'm more inclined, but not always, to assign readiness and to let them choose on interest and learning profile. I just want to show you one last thing, and I'll try to do it really fast because it's the end of a very long day. But the third of Adam's common sense pieces is checking to know where kids are all the way down the line. And I want to show you just one last thing here so that as your colleagues and you continue to consider differentiation, you have some sense of this. This is a pre-assessment. And my challenge to you would be to try something like this once next year, or this year if you have time left, and see what it does for you. This is a teacher in Connecticut. She's a very seasoned teacher, been teaching 15 or 20 years. Went to a workshop and somebody was saying, you know, what if you did a pre-assessment? What if you checked when a unit began to see where the kids are instead of just doing the unit, you know, just assuming they're all in a certain place? She said, I've never done that before, but I don't guess it hurt to try. Now, I want you to think about you. This is her. She has this wonderful unit on telling time. It's the first unit on telling time the kids have in school. It's not that they might not have learned something at home, but this is the first time it's introduced to them in school. So she's got her unit in a box in the closet with all the little clocks that she uses and the activities and the books and all in that box. And she's been teaching that box for a long time. Every year she adds some new stuff to the box, but she loves that unit. She's been doing it for 100 years. And when she pulls it out, every kid does the same first lesson and then the same second lesson and then the same third lesson. And it's so wonderful to pull out that box, you know, and have it all ready. None of us do that, I'm sure. So she just went back and she drew a big circle on a piece of paper. And she said to the kids, I want you to do two things. Draw a clock that shows me exactly 6 o'clock, and on the back, write what you know about clocks and time. Now, I'm going to do this kind of quickly, but this is Kevino, and this is his 6 o'clock. Now, a lot of teachers who want to be nice will say, well, maybe he just doesn't have very good motor control, or you know, maybe his father is military or Austrian, and that's how come he's got this 23-hour thing instead of 24. In the States, we don't do that. And see, the clock's almost at 6 o'clock. The hands are almost there if they were just inverted. Jay McTighe has a wonderful line, you should assume a child is innocent of learning until he has proven himself guilty of learning. Has Kevino proven that he knows 6? No. So the assumption is, doesn't have it yet. But now the great thing is she's asked them to explain on the back. And I want to show you about 5 kids here. Really good to ask them to do and to explain. It's going to be real interesting. So here's Kevino. And this is his 6 o'clock. And when he tried to explain it, he doesn't know what he's doing. And he didn't want to look silly, so he just rewrote the directions. Make your own clock, show the numbers and the time for 6 o'clock, write about clocks and time. Now, this kid is way worse off than the teacher's expecting. Way worse off than she's assuming. Here's Sean, on the other hand, who looks pretty good. Big difference between Kevino and Sean. She's been planning to pull out that unit and do it with everybody. But somehow Covino and Sean don't look exactly the same here. Everything's great. Until you turn it over and ask Sean to explain clocks and time. I don't know what the German expression for it is. We call it shooting the bull in English. It means just making hot air come out. No meaning, just talking, just words running out. So here's Sean. I know time is easy. I know to make 6:30. It is easy, so easy. Time is very special. So now what I love about this is it's real. Here's this teacher, this kid seems to know something, can't explain a thing. So do you assume he's good? Do you assume he needs a little more help? It's not a right answer there. Here's Tori. She looks like she's really kind of advanced. She's working on seconds, and they've never done a time thing before. So she's got that second thing down. She's got a longhand, shorthand problem, but in general, the clock face is right. Other than the longhand, shorthand problem, her other issue is that she doesn't understand that the minutes count as one of the seconds, and so her day is a little longer than most of ours because there are too many seconds in that hour. But she looks like she's in pretty good shape, although she needs some longhand, shorthand work and obviously a little help with seconds when she gets there. We eat lunch at 11:30, we get out of school at 3:20, we get in school at 9. Not chronological, but does she know how to tell time and how to mark the day with it? So there's a kid who's kind of advanced in some ways, but needs a little backtracking in a couple. Here's another Sean who thought the clock was boring, and so he fixed it. If you're really trying to learn what kids like so you can attach your stuff to them, he's a Pokemon fan. Did Pokemon hit over here too? And so his clock is correct, but once again, he has a longhand, shorthand issue. Let's see if he seems to understand other than that. 6 o'clock, mom's up, 5 o'clock, dad's up, 7:15, Sean's up, 9:30, Kay's up, 8:30 bus, 9 o'clock school, 10:30 snack, 11:30 lunch, 4 o'clock home. Her first lesson is, this is a clock face. Does he need that first lesson? No. He could run her life. And several of those lessons are just going to be a waste. Here's Chelsea, who also thought the clock was boring, and she fixed it. You can see that she gave some thoughts to putting in seconds, but she wasn't confident. So she has the idea, but she's going to need some help to go there. Chelsea says a clock helps you tell time. Clocks are fun. 60 minutes in an hour. I can read from the microwave. I woke at 6 and my mom was late for work. And she doesn't have a very good step-by-step essay, but she's very advanced. She gave a definition. She's the first person that said this is what time is used for. She's got the connection between getting up on time and being late, and she also says to the teacher, by the way, if you would come into the 21st century and just use the stupid microwave, we wouldn't have to mess with these hands anyhow. And in our country, there's a debate about whether people will quit teaching analog time because kids don't use it anymore. So Chelsea doesn't even have a longhand, shorthand problem, and she really understands a lot. Need to know that. And finally, here's Leanne. She's messy, and so you can kind of look at it and think, holy cow, this kid's a wreck. She can't, it's just messy all over the place. Well, let me tell you what Leanne did. She went through and she first wrote the numbers very lightly to try to get them spaced correctly. And then she saw that she didn't have them quite right, so she went around the second time and she wrote them more neatly to get them where they needed to be. And then she went around the third time and tried to erase the first set of numbers, but it didn't work too well. And then she went around the fourth time and she wrote in seconds very lightly to make sure she got them. And then she went back the fifth time and she went over the seconds to make sure she had them and erased the ones, the sixth time to make sure she erased the ones that weren't in the right place. And then Leanne told us what she knows about clocks and time. And she did that in the same amount of time that the other kids had. Now, I want to ask you a question. We call them rhetorical questions in English. Don't mean for you to answer it. I just want you to think about it as you go home. If you're this teacher in Connecticut, Are you glad you gave the pre-assessment, or are you sorry?